Reporting on the games you love by people who love to game. The MMO Reporter Network. Hi everybody, and welcome to another episode of First Report. I'm Chris, and I'm joined today by Kyt Dotson, who is an MMO player and journalist with a technology background and a strong interest in anthropology. Runs a video series on YouTube under the moniker ThePrinceofMilAve and a Twitch show called MMO Anthropology. Kyt spends more time looking at communities and social networks in games than mechanics themselves. You can find him over at twitch.tv/MMO Anthropology and at youtube.com/ThePrinceofMilAve, and I'll have links in the show notes. Hello, Kyt. How are you?
Hello. I'm extremely well.
Welcome to the show. It's great to have someone else to talk to about this game. I did this with the last episode for Guild of Dungeoneering, and I think it's going to be a great discussion on Skyforge. It's now this is at the same time, to me, it's really hard as I look to try and introduce this game because in many ways it is super familiar, and it's at the same time does some things that are quite different that make it not just your typical also ran MMO. Have you been finding the same thing? Have you been streaming the game and all that sort of stuff, trying to wrap it up in a neat little bundle?
Yeah, I can say that it's definitely building on previous MMOs, or at least previous concepts. In fact, I suppose a lot of people who are very familiar with JRPGs will see some similarities with the whole combining of science fiction and fantasy in a divinity concept, but I don't believe that I've seen a previous MMO, except for maybe like two-dimensional, like 2D web browser styles,
right,
try the same genre.
It does have a very, in its world design, to me, has a very Final Fantasy vibe to it. Do you get that?
Yeah, I can definitely see that.
Yeah. So basically, in this game, we are playing as immortals on our path to godhood. I mean, I know in a lot of other MMOs we're tried to made to be fit to feel like gods, but in this one, we're actually becoming gods. We'll even talk about our orders, our followers, a little bit later in the show. But that's a whole different way to look at it. Kind of gives you a different power level to begin with. We're dealing at a different level of things pretty much right away. No longer, I mean, I haven't run into a poop quest yet. Have you run into a poop quest yet?
No, I haven't.
Pretty much every MMO I've ever played, there's at least one, well, WoW, every expansion, there's at least one poop quest. But, yeah, it's definitely, he does a good job, I think, of giving that scale of not necessarily your earthly problems, right?
Right.
The quests and all that sort of stuff. Now, let's talk really quickly about the world itself. The world is called Aelion, and basically you're coming down from this immortal city on high to help out the denizens of the world below. I would compare this closer to maybe Guild Wars, the original Guild Wars, than WoW in its world design as far as instancing goes. Almost everything is instanced. What was your experience like as you went through that sort of very highly instanced gameplay?
Well, one of the things I've gotten used to is that a lot of newly launching games are pulling away from just giant open maps and into more and more instanced maps. One of the better examples is World of Warcraft had a fluid world, but Guild Wars 2 has large maps but that are all separated from each other. And then you get to a hybrid of that, which is the one that we see in Skyforge, which is where your social areas are relatively medium-sized maps with lots of people, but then when you jump out, you either go into a dungeon with 3 people, or you end up in a huge zone with a bunch of different little quests around it with a bunch of other people in it. And so you never get stuck going into, you don't know what you're getting into when you're jumping out into Aelion.
Yeah.
You get it mixed up a little bit. So it's not dungeon. It's sometimes a dungeon, it's sometimes a zone with other people.
Yeah, and it's interesting the way in which they do the rewards as well, because I think they've got it down pretty good. We'll talk about this in a little bit more detail later, but basically it's like the more time you spend somewhere, the more rewards you get, which is the way it should be, really. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about the classes real quick. as a free-to-play game, and this is a free-to-play game, you get 3 classes with the free version of the game: the Lightbringer, the Cryomancer, and Paladin. And a quick note before we talk about those: you can purchase packs where you can unlock the Gunner and the Berserker, which are 2 DPS classes. And then you can also buy another more expensive pack as well, which will also unlock the Knight and the Alchemist. The Knight is a tank, the Alchemist is a support/DPS character. So, which class did you start your adventure with, Kyt?
Well, in the closed beta test, I actually started out with the Paladin because I'm much more comfortable with a sword and shield type class.
Yep.
But I did test out the Lightbringer and the Cryomancer.
Right.
But I ended up sticking with the Paladin because I was much more comfortable with punching things in the face.
Sword and board. That's what I did too, actually. I got up to just over 4K prestige, which we'll talk about what prestige is in a second, with my Paladin. I did try the Lightbringer and the Cryomancer. The Lightbringer is a support/DPS class. The Cryomancer is a straight-up DPS class with some CC, really good CC abilities, especially for PvP, which we'll talk about that in a little bit. Cool and interesting and different idea with the classes, though, is that you can switch between your classes at any time. You can be leveling up along with one, and you can switch to another, etc. I really found it, as I went further along, especially when you're unlocking other classes, is that jumping to those other classes makes you take a step back, though, because you're not as powerful as you were in your main class. So it's not like you jump back and forth. You do have some quote-unquote leveling from your character as a whole, but most of your power does come from your specific class and your equipment that's tied to that class. So I didn't find myself switching around between the different classes a whole bunch. What about you?
No, and in fact, after I discovered that the progression of each of the classes is their own, and that in order to unlock other classes, you have to push as far as possible into, well, something we'll discuss later, which is the Ascension Atlas, I discovered that in order to actually progress with some of the goals that I had in the game, I had to pick a class and stick with it.
Mm-hmm. But you can unlock all the other classes. We'll talk, I think, just a little bit about the Ascension Atlas. You only get one character per account. You don't get to create a whole bunch of alts because your alts are the different classes. That if you decide, okay, you know what, I'm tired of Paladin, I want to jump to Lightbringer for a little while, you can do that, and then you go through the content. One of the things that I found frustrating, though, is that you get, as you're leveling through, the first time you do a zone, you get a certain amount of rewards. It's the first time you do the zone with that character. So if I go back, and I just recently unlocked the Kinetic, which is a really cool class, I went back to some zones to try and do them. I didn't get those first-time rewards again, which would have helped me level up that or advance that character. So I found it really challenging to start to progress the classes that were not my main class, because I was going through content a second time, which would give me alternate rewards instead of the main sparks that you need, which... Let's move along, because I want to start to... Let's talk about Prestige real quick, because and the Essential Atlas, because then we can wrap all this up in one bow. So Prestige is basically a score of how far your character has progressed. You get prestige through spending points in your Ascension Atlas. You get prestige through gear, and that all gives you more power, so to speak. And the Ascension Atlas, which is part of that as well, is your rewards in your zones, your dungeons, everything that you do are sparks. You've got your sparks of creation, destruction, and balance, as well as class-specific sparks and some general sparks, which you get for having a premium account. You then spend these sparks on nodes in the Ascension Atlas to unlock different abilities, and we'll show that here. It's very linear with a couple of branching points, and then once you get to a certain point in your class Ascension Atlas, it's the path of the Paladin or path of the Cryomancer or whatever, you unlock this sort of meta Ascension Atlas, which you can then use to work your way out and unlock all the other classes. Now, as you're going to those other classes, it's not just points that you spend, you actually get benefits. You get stat increases as you work your way through that meta Ascension Atlas to unlock the different classes. So this whole system, the way Prestige and the Ascension Atlas is set up, Kyt, what are your general thoughts about that?
Well, one, when I first saw the Ascension Atlas, I was immediately harkened back to Final Fantasy because it looks a lot like one of the trees that I had to work my way through.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't remember which Final Fantasy I saw it in. There's been so many different like materia things in the various games.
Right.
But the second thing that got me was, well, it's a very interesting way of looking at progression through soft skills or through like passives and stuff like that, because each of those little balls that you see that you progress through provide stat increases. And certainly at first it's relatively linear, but once you branch out into the big gigantic atlas, you can actually sort of pick different paths to go down depending on like which direction you feel like taking. But one of the things that I didn't realize when I was first looking at that is that unlocking other classes in the atlas is via the atlas.
Yeah.
So you actually have to progress from your class across the atlas to another class, which means that all of the classes are there in the atlas. And part of one of the things that, if I had gone and read the materials beforehand, had mentioned that as soon as you break out into the big atlas, is that maybe you should be thinking about, if you want a particular other class, is to set a goal of reaching it, which means that you need to look at the path you need to reach it. And some classes are further away from others in the atlas.
Right.
Granted, those classes are like actually further away classes, like things like the gunner or things that are considered higher tiers than the first three that you start with.
And I thought well, one thing I want to mention, if anybody does play the game, is right-click on that class that you want to get to, click Set Path, and that'll actually do a little dotted blue line on the most efficient path for you to get to that class. So I started, I was horrible, and I spent some points I shouldn't have because I flipped twice. I started with wanting to get Knight. Again, I'm a tank usually. Thought that was really cool. Then said, no, you know what? Everybody's going to be Knight. Everybody's going to want to be a Knight. So I said, I'll be Necro. And then I went Necro. And then I started looking at all the different classes to do some class videos. And I played Kinetic, and I'm like, nope, that's where I'm going. So I probably spent a few hundred sparks in the wrong direction as I was working my way through to those different classes. But in the end, I settled on Kinetic and did unlock that. That's a pretty good way to do it. The set path, that gives you a goal, that gives you a direction. But holy cow, the time and the grind. Did I mention the grind? And there's a little bit of a grind. And have I said that you grind to get there? Because it's a little grindy. What did you find it a little grindy?
Actually, I found it considerably grindy. And one of the problems is that when you look at the big atlas, if you're not the sort of person who is prepared to just go in there and play what is essentially the same content over and over, it's daunting because the larger Ascension Atlas is gigantic looking. However, one of the nice things about this is that it also provides that path tool, and one, you actually have a sense of progression, because as you move through it and you unlock more, you can watch how far you've gone. And also, I know that I just mentioned that if you're not the sort of person who's used to going through the same stuff over and over again, fortunately, one of the things that Skyforge seems to be doing really well, and I hope to see them do more of this in the future, is that the instances are bigger than the paths that you take through them. Because some of the dungeon instances seem to be kind of linear and they lead you in a sort of story, but then you discover there's side alcoves or different places that you could have gone that you weren't taken. And often when you're taken back there in the story, is because the story has placed things in those side alcoves. So
Right.
Skyforge's developers have done a fairly good job of reusing, or at least making sense of the fact that the instances themselves don't need to be a linear thing that you just go straight through every time.
Yeah, the flip side of that, though, is that some groups that I've been in have only wanted to go down the most efficient path to get through it, because you get some rewards, token stuff, but you only get the sparks for completing the dungeon or the mission or whatever you're working on.
So speed runs will probably be a really common thing.
Oh, yeah, I'm already finding that people are starting to get a little annoyed. Although I did have a really great experience where a group was struggling. There were 2 paladins in the group. The other paladin was tanking, and I was doing more of a DPS stuff, and it didn't go well. Ended up that other paladin just stood at the entrance for like 5 minutes, so we ended up kicking her because she wasn't answering IMs or anything like that. So we tried it again. I tanked, and the group was really supportive as we worked through it. And that's such a cool experience. A fairly good community so far. I haven't seen it be... There's always the typical, this is a WoW clone. And it's so not a WoW clone. Like, not
you're right,
at
it's
all.
not.
But you see it. You see it, oh, this is just like WoW. WoW does this better. Oh, frustrating. Anyway.
I'm totally shaking my head right now. I know lots of people say things like, it's a WoW clone. I'm looking at this going, no.
How is this a WoW clone? Yeah, okay, so we've talked about the Ascension Atlas. So as you work your way through the Ascension Atlas, you get more prestige. Some content is gated by prestige. You also get prestige through your gear. Each class has a weapon and an offhand, or a weapon and a secondary thing. And then rings and what are they, amulets?
Trophies? I forget what they're called.
Trophies, amulets, yeah. So there's only really 3-4 different types of loot. Very simplified. I love the fact that it tells you when something is better. And now it tells you just if the prestige is better. So as you're going through, you're getting new gear, you go onto your equipment screen. Oh, there's a little red arrow. That means that you can click on it. It will show you all the other gear and which one is better. And that's a really good thing. If you're working for specific stats, though, if you would rather have more might than prestige, if that's more important, that won't work because it doesn't do that. It only looks at the prestige. But overall, that's a really cool thing. So you work through your gear, you work through your Ascension Atlas to get to more content. You also, as a god, get your order, your followers. The followers, basically, they build a big statue of you in the Hall of Greatness, which is an area in the main city. They build chapels for you, temples for you, which the more followers you get, the more bonuses you get. You can send your followers on mission as well for resources, which the resources are only good in the order system. It's not like you're getting credits for outside of that or anything like that. It also helps your Pantheon, if you're in a Pantheon, which is your guild. Do you find similarities to the Hall of Greatness, the stuff that you're doing with your order, to the garrison system in WoW?
Yeah, well, actually, that was the first thing that I thought it was like when I first saw it, and primarily because I saw that I could have a specific type of follower called an adept that I could send on missions to do stuff for my order. And the first thing that came to mind was the garrison system from World of Warcraft, where, you build your garrison and out comes NPCs that then you can just send on duty missions to do whatever. And it seemed extremely similar, in fact. But it's a lot more complex than that, because the missions certainly have particular points that need to be done by different followers and stuff like that, but the adepts themselves can convey bonuses to you, or at least your choice in what you have in there changes the stats that come to your characters because of the chapels or the regions that you've been able to unlock by sending them out on missions. Mm-hmm. I was trying to remember how it functions, because I think that you unlock areas called provinces, and each of them has 8 chapels, and then in those chapels you put some sort of a relic of holy power, and then you put someone to take care of it. And as you unlock each one, that's where you get stats from, and you can switch those out as well. So it's like another equipment system almost.
And I found that to be, that's going to be a big end game thing, because even though I've been playing for quite a while, and I think I am ahead of the curve, I'm at, on my main class, I'm at 4,000 something prestige, and I think the curve right now is somewhere around 2,500, 3,000. There's people up at 20,000 prestige already, which is absolutely nuts, because that has to be living in this game. You need these items to unlock the chapel for the first time, and to upgrade the chapels, which is sort of the part of this system that actually gets you bonuses. You can only get that every other day. One of those things is what it looks like. You can get it on missions that you can do every other day. So that's going to be a slow grind, which that's fine. That's another thing to work on when you've hit your cap, because there are caps on your spark that you can get, so you can only get a certain amount of those, so that's locked. Credits and a whole bunch of other things as well, so you can only go so far in the game, which, like, how did these people get around to get up to 20k? They must have just timed it like to the minute. Oh, okay, my cap has reset, I'm back in game. And then boom, go, and it's absolutely crazy. Anyways, back to the orders, though. It's kind of cool. You got your followers. They've got little signs for you. So, no, they don't have that. Paparazzi come to follow you. Well, not really. But you do have a statue, and you get to recarve your statue all the time, which is interesting.
And in order to introduce the order system, you actually get tracked down and found by one of your followers in the very beginning.
Yeah,
but that doesn't happen ever again. But it was an amusing way to present it.
Yes,
because they're kind of like, how the word fan is kind of short for fanatic.
Yeah,
that's exactly the way that followers are presented.
Yeah. But you do get to go to the Hall of Greatness and select new adepts and new followers and stuff like that. So that's kind of cool. You get to pick which ones you want, and there's different classes that they have, and they level up. So it gets quite complex. So we've talked sort of about the metagame. Let's get into some of the details here. The combat, what you're actually doing, because you're fighting all the time, because there's really nothing else to do but fight. So
and there's
fight.
Lots of problems on Alien.
Yeah, there's those pesky bugs, those mechanoids. Oh, it's just like, I just cleaned up this mess. This is why we can't have nice things. It's very, 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 very action-oriented, but all the different classes do have a different approach to that action. The Paladin, which we've both played, is very much a combo system type of class, where you right click once, then you left click, that does one thing. You right click or left click twice, right click once, that's something different. Left click 3 times, right click once, etc. You're going through these different combos. Reminds me, the Paladin especially, of the Warden in Lord of the Rings Online. I don't know if you've played that. Whereas the Kinetic is a charge based system where you're charging your skills all the time. So it's very, very interesting to do that. And then there's double taps to dodge, which is becoming quite common in games now, some sort of dodge mechanic like that. But I found it a real struggle, especially in dungeons, that there's no dedicated healers. And I like playing a healer, so that's something I'm going to miss in this game. You can't get healed by another player, well, totally in the game. Was that a frustration for you as well?
Well, actually, yes, I can certainly say that it was. In fact, one of the things that I found really odd about this game is that Skyforge seems to take a much more arcade direction when it comes to healing, because the way that you make sure that you get healed in a fight is, as you're kicking the crap out of bad guys, little light orbs pop out of them and they heal you. So when you're in a group, often it's you have to come to some sort of a consensus with other people. Am I hurt enough to go grab that, or is someone much more injured than I am? And there's always the possibility that someone runs over these things by accident. Fortunately, you don't pick them up if you're at full health. But even if you're slightly injured, you can still suck one up, which, of course, you kind of wastes the extra healing in it. And that is not something that I've seen in any other MMO. The light, the balls of health falling on the ground.
Yeah, it's different. I found it even more challenging than like Guild Wars 2's lack of dedicated healer, because even then there are some classes that have some heal skills. You go staff, elemental, and water.
Yep.
You got some heals. Guardian got some heals. This has nothing. You get shields.
Yep.
And what's the difference, really, when you get down to it? What's the difference between having a Lightbringer there spamming shield on you, which has happened in boss fights, or having someone there healing? There's no difference. It's not like it's more fun for them. So I didn't necessarily agree with that design decision myself.
There's also a psychological thing. As your health drops, I think the stress and the expectation that you're going to lose increases. Even though someone is throwing a shield on you, you don't really see the effect, except that your health doesn't go down.
Yeah.
Because it's just not going back up.
Yeah. Yeah, it was very, very scary as I get through it. I'm spamming my shields as a paladin. And oh, wow. Well, with my kinetic, again, talking about the health, when I went back to... Oh, here's another thing. The way that you go out into the world is you start at the capital city, and then you have these teleporters, which will bring you to a world map, which has different missions that you can go on, whether it's a dungeon, open world area, etc. This rotates. It's not always the same. It has a timer, and it rotates through all the different missions that are available. And when I went back with my kinetic, which was much less powerful than my paladin because I just switched classes, and here's the thing, I didn't have any weapons for the kinetic, and there's nowhere in game to buy anything. You have to wait for drops, at least not that I found. And so I had to go into these low-level zones. I set it to very easy, but I was still dying tons, and my health kept on going down because I was going through. And again, the most of the equipment drops, other than rings, tend to only come at the end of the dungeon. So I went through 3 or 4 dungeons. Still don't have any weapons for my kinetic. You can still use all your skills, but I'm doing so much less damage because I don't have that equipment equipped. That was frustrating, seeing my health drop. But the good part of that is I did have health orbs drop, so I could try and survive stuff. So
that reminds me of another interesting thing about repeating the dungeons, which is when you go back, often the game will offer you a challenge for extra goodies. And the reason I was reminded is that one of those challenges was do not use more than 5 health orbs per fight.
Yeah.
Although I can see, like, one of the things that the health orbs does do as well is that as you're fighting, the fact that they appear means that you can essentially get a boost out of nowhere, which allows you some more staying power. But one of the problems that they present is sometimes I've gone through fights where it felt like I wasn't getting any health orbs.
Yeah. Well, and what I have found is with bosses, at least, the only guaranteed way to get a health orb is when you take off. Because let me take a step back because I'm explaining something I haven't explained yet. The bosses don't just have 1 health bar. They'll have a health bar times 10. So you have to whittle down that health bar 10 times. I have found most of the time that when you take away a health bar, you get a health orb. So that's one of the few ways to almost guarantee that you'll get a health orb.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I'd totally forgotten that some of the mechanic, at least the health mechanic, is very it feels very arcadey with the multiple health bars, that the critter you're actually attacking, once you whittle one down, another one pops up. Of course, you can tell that it has multiple health bars because they're stacked on top of each other and there's a number.
Yeah.
So it's not hidden. It's just that was immediately it made certain of the enemies feel a lot more tough than I initially expected when I was looking at them.
Yeah. So that's kind of cool, though. I mean, it's different.
Yes.
Have you gone into PvP at all?
Actually, I have not. I'm totally unfamiliar.
I've jumped into the 6-person free-for-all and the 3v3. There is also a 10v10. I don't know why I wrote 10v10 or 10v3 in the show notes. I found them both quite underwhelming and really not much fun as a paladin, especially a tank spec paladin. I guess I could have changed my spec, but or the kinetic, which again still has no weapons. But it's anyways. And that's all it is. It's just these matches. There's no meta stuff to PvP. It's just go in, fight, get a reward, done. Some people might like that. I like a little bit more meta to my PvP. I like, I want a PvP. Okay, I'm going to get this. I'm going to go, these rewards, or follow this rank, like work towards a rank, or some other progression thing that's meant for PvP, whereas this has none of that. It seems like a tacked on afterthought.
Ouch.
Yeah, unfortunately.
This actually reminds me of another complaint that I've been hearing about PvP, and it's another combat mechanic that I just totally forgot to mention, which is, as you're fighting enemies, if you get them down to a particular health threshold, it's like 10% or 5%, you're given the option to execute them.
Right.
Which is a reason to play each of the classes at least once to see how they execute enemies.
Yeah.
Because the paladin, I think, throws them into the air and then blasts them with lightning.
Right.
And the gunner launches rockets at them and blows them up. The problem is that apparently execution is a thing that you can do in PvP.
Yep.
And people really hate it.
Yep. I do. By the way, the kinetic launches people up in the air and then squishes them with rocks. Turns them into jelly. It's okay, the PvP, but I wouldn't go there if I wasn't testing it out. Let's put it that way. And I like PvP. Right? So, a couple of last things to mention. The Pantheon, we've already talked about. That's your guild. There's Pantheon missions for your followers. And there's some quote-unquote endgame. I'm putting quote-unquote because there's no real max level to be that switch to endgame. You're always, I think, progressing your character. I think it would take years for someone to unlock the entire Ascension Atlas, the meta one.
Oh, yeah.
And for each class. So I don't think there's any sort of max level, so to speak, but there is a certain area where you get to different types of content, which are world invasions and stuff like that. So there's that. And then want to talk about the free-to-play model, which I think is really, really successful in this game, in that I never, ever, ever saw anything that would make anyone pay money. The only thing that could be looked at that would be your order system, the godhood sort of stuff, where you can buy some of the holy text, which are one of the resources, but for that in the cash shop. But you can't buy any of the sparks, which are the character progression stuff. You can't buy power. You can't buy gear in the store. You can buy costumes, but that's it. This is really, really well done. The premium, that's like a subscription sort of stuff. That gives you a lot of bonuses to credits, sparks, etc. But I see that like a sub rather than a buy sort of thing. Well, I don't mind that so much.
Yes, and in fact, it is very much like having a subscription because of the weekly spark and credit limit. Because all the premium subscription does is it boosts how many that you get. It gives you some bonuses throughout the week. But the thing is that nothing increases that limit. So if you run with the subscription, you actually hit your cap faster, which means that you have to play less time. So one of the things that I've seen in the free-to-play model in a lot of different games is that it's you spend time for money or you spend money for time.
Yeah.
And Skyforge is an excellent example of that, and it does it in a fashion that doesn't actually make anyone more powerful than anyone else, because at any point, someone with very little money could have grinded there if they had a hell of a lot of time, and someone with very little time can get something that boosts the outcome of the little time that they have. And also something to point out is that while there's the weekly limits and stuff like that locking down the currencies like the sparks and credits, that this is not the end of progression in the game. Even after you hit your weekly limit with sparks and stuff like that, you can still earn the things that let you buy costumes, which I forget what they're called, like celestial threads.
Yeah.
There's you also need to get myrrh, which I think is for pantheons, I think that's for pantheons and stuff like that. There's a whole bunch of currencies in this game that you see from the get-go, and it seems it seems that there's a lot of them and they're very complex, but the truth is that all you have to do is spend a moment to look at them, and they're all very categorical.
Yeah.
So each one has to do with a very particular system, and at the very beginning you may not have been introduced to that system, but you keep playing and you will get an introduction.
Yeah. Yeah. And here's the thing, just because you hit your caps doesn't mean you have to stop playing. You can still play,
Right.
have fun, go through the dungeons, do a dungeon with your Pantheon, have a social night. There's these invasion things for the really high prestige players. You can still do all that sort of stuff and still work towards stuff, work on your order missions. So it's not like there's nothing to do, you just won't progress, and that's okay. I'm okay with that.
Yeah. Although, like, you don't progress in the main sort of way, but
Right.
like because there's the constellation of ancillary currencies means that you still progress in other directions, especially if you want to look good or if you want to help your Pantheon or etc.
Yeah.
So your progression never actually stops. It's just limiting. It's kind of, I suppose it's limiting the growth of the player base when it comes to level of content that everyone is approaching, so that everyone approaches it at about the same rate, I think, is what the limit does.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that I think that's really cool. I'm really happy with the free-to-play model. I think that this is a real success and not a money grab in any way whatsoever, although you can spend your money if you want.
Yes, and it doesn't jump in your face either.
So, I think for me, at least, the biggest bonuses, I think, are the breadth of gameplay. There's so much that you can do, and the combat is good, although quite repetitive, and that's really where the downside comes into this. It took me about a week before I started pulling up Netflix and watching that as I grind through. If I'm not streaming and I'm playing, there's not much points now where I give my undivided attention to the game because I've done it. And only a couple of weeks in and I'm already feeling like that. That's kind of, it's a real downside for me. I don't like repeating content quite this much without some sort of change. It's one thing when it's a dungeon. I love running dungeons. I will run dungeons till I'm blue in the face. But to have to then redo zones, there's very little content in the end, and you have to repeat what content there is a tremendous amount to progress. A lot. It does reward you for that with progression. When I went through a dungeon, I got like 1,500 sparks, and I was incredibly happy because that got me so far to unlocking the kinetic. But it was one type of spark. I needed the two other types of sparks as well, so I had to go and run this crap I didn't want to run again. And that wasn't fun, and that's not fun to me. So if you have a very low threshold for that sort of stuff, this is not your game. You are going to get frustrated. You're going to say the whole game sucks, which it doesn't. And you're going to badmouth it to everybody else, which is what I kind of do, and I don't like a game. Anyways, what about you? What's your sort of final thoughts on Skyforge? Would you recommend this to a friend?
I would probably only recommend this to a friend who was the sort of person that had like the obsessive nature to get through stuff in order to hit particular goals.
Gotta catch balls sort of thing?
Yeah, I mean, like, I have the same experience that you have had, and that is, I was looking with only access to the first 3 classes, which seem extremely limited in of themselves, at least initially, but get really interesting later on, means that I immediately started looking at everything else that I could get my hands on. And so it felt like Skyforge was really goal-oriented, that everything that I wanted to do, I'd have to pick a goal and then aim for it in order to get the thing that I wanted to play in order to have more fun. And so the lack of content is kind of belied by having a class that is arcadey and feels good under your fingers. And so but the problem did become seeing the same area over and over and over again, because even with the included randomized or apparent challenges or the ability to increase the difficulty, I really didn't want to see the same, I don't know, eel nagas again. I didn't want to see the same bugs again. Or the same people suffering the same problem. So I think right now Skyforge has an excellent system for reaching for godhood, essentially.
Yeah.
It gives you a good goal and a path to reach it, but the content is really going to have to update constantly to give more stuff to do, or at least more stuff to look at.
And I think that's where a lot of people are going to say that it fails, which I would disagree that it fails. I just think it's an incredibly narrow audience that's going to enjoy this. I think that where people are going to say that it fails, though, is the lack of content. With most MMOs, you go through the game, and yes, you're doing similar stuff, but in a different area. And while it seems like a trivial, petty little thing, going from one zone and questing in that zone in Guild Wars 2 or in WoW, and then going to the next one, actually makes a significant difference because you're not doing the exact same thing. You kind of got to figure it out. Oh, this is different. Oh, this story is going on here. But I'm seeing the same. I've already been here and saved you, you dumbass. Why are you dying again? Why do I have to come here and save you? Right? Like, well, it's just going to... I've already done the zones 4 or 5 times. And like the big zones, which are killer. Like, they take an hour to 2 hours to complete. And I'm bored of them. Absolutely bored. So.
I think one of the things that really causes the frustration for me is that while I understand in normal MMOs with big maps, I think City of Heroes and World of Warcraft were really good examples of this. As you went up in level to higher level zones, the story followed. Like you progressed, the world progressed, it actually moved forward. A different problem was in play every time you went up. Whereas in Skyforge, you're going back to the same instances over and over and over again, and the problem never progresses.
Yeah.
So you never get the sense that you've actually enhanced in power, except for the fact you're blowing through this problem that you've seen before faster.
Yeah. Excuse me. I think that I'm going to play this for a little while longer. I'm done my official coverage. I'll stream a little bit more. I want to get a few more other videos out, but I don't know if I'm going to be playing this in a month.
Yeah, I don't think I will be either.
Yeah.
But I'll be paying attention to it because it's nice to see a new game on the market that's actually trying and has a really good model. It's beautiful too. It's a very good looking game.
Yeah.
It's just that I am not a grinder.
No. And the other thing to mention is there's some technical issues. There's memory leak somewhere in there where it causes you to have to reboot the game every few hours, and there's a crash. I crash probably 3 times per play session, maybe 4.
Yeah, same here.
Desktop. Yeah. So, but it's not the nice thing is it's not in-game bugs. It's technology bugs. So you're not going through and having something not work. Well, thanks, Kyt, for coming out and chatting some Skyforge with me. It's always nice to have someone else talking about the game that we're taking a look at. Why don't you let people know once again where they can find all the other stuff that you do?
Oh yeah, so what I do is I have my own personal YouTube channel called ThePrinceofMilAve that was for my early anthropological work, which was on a street called Mill Avenue, but then just turned into my video game channel. And I also do a Twitch show on Fridays and Saturdays around 9 p.m. and 8 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. Twitch TV MMO Anthropology.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Kyt. It's always fun to have someone new on here. Want to thank everyone for watching the video, downloading it, taking a look. You can take a look at more videos at MMOReporter.com on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/MMO Reporter Network. And don't forget to check out our Kickstarter, Kickstarter.com, or actually tinyurl.com/MMO Reporter Packs. Thanks for watching, everybody, and we hope to see you in game. Thanks for watching the video, everybody. Don't forget to check out all the other podcasts at MMOReporter.com or by clicking on any of the links here. And please check out our Patreon campaign at patreon.com/MMOReporter. Thanks, everyone, and see you in game.